Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
It is so great to be diving into this one with you all.
Yeah, I am really excited about this deep dive. So imagine, just for a second, like the most powerful military commander on Earth.
Right, a guy with unparalleled access to wealth and absolute authority.
Exactly. He has the direct ear of his king, but behind all the armor, he is harboring this dark terminal secret.
A disease that is just slowly eating him alive.
Yes, and the crazy part is, the only person on the entire planet who holds the key to his survival is a captive child. I mean, a servant girl that his army literally kidnapped from a neighboring country during a brutal raid.
It genuinely sounds like the plot of a high-stakes modern political thriller.
It totally does. But that exact power dynamic actually played out nearly 3,000 years ago.
It did. And it completely upends how we think about where solutions actually come from.
So true.
When we look at the ancient texts we're diving into today, specifically the first 8 chapters of 2 Kings, we are not just looking at some dusty chronicle of ancient Middle Eastern politics, you know?
Right, it's so much more than that.
It is literally a masterclass in the psychology of power, the anatomy of crisis, and that really profound, often uncomfortable tension between human corruption and absolute truth.
And that tension is exactly what we are exploring today. We are dropping right into the middle of a deeply divided, politically unstable world.
Very unstable.
You have the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. You have these kings clinging to crumbling power. And then on the other side, you have these uncompromising radical voices of the ancient prophets, Elijah and Elisha.
Which is such a clash of operating systems.
So let's set the stage. Where do we even begin? Because the text definitely doesn't ease us in. It starts with a literal fall.
Exactly. We begin in the capital city of Samaria with King Ahaziah of Israel. He's the son of Ahab, which, well, that means he inherited a deeply corrupt, unstable administration right out of the gate.
Not a great start.
No, and the text gives us this startlingly specific detail. Ahaziah falls through the lattice in his upper chamber and is severely injured.
Ouch. Like, how does that even happen?
Well, to understand the mechanics of this, you have to picture ancient Near Eastern architecture. The roofs of these royal houses were flat, and they were often used as living spaces to catch the evening breeze.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right, and the lattice was essentially this wooden grate or an unglazed window that opened outward. So if the wooden pegs were rotting or if it just wasn't secured properly, a person leaning against it would just plunge straight down into the courtyard below.
Wow. Okay, so the king of the nation is lying in bed, broken, possibly paralyzed, and absolutely terrified he's going to die.
It is the ultimate crisis of leadership.
The ground has quite literally given way beneath him. So what is his immediate reaction? Because, I mean, if I'm in that position, I'm calling in the best doctors.
Sure, or in his cultural context, pleading with the God of his own nation for mercy.
Exactly. But Ahaziah does something fascinatingly destructive instead.
He bypasses the God of Israel entirely. He dispatches messengers across the border to the Philistine city of Ekron to consult their local deity.
To see if he's going to recover, right?
Yes, and the deity he consults is Beelzebub.
Wait, Beelzebub. Doesn't that literally translate to the Lord of the Flies?
It does.
Why on earth, in the middle of a life-threatening medical emergency, are you sending messengers to the Lord of the Flies? That sounds insane.
It sounds totally absurd to a modern ear, I know. But there is a profound psychological mechanism at work here. In the ancient Near East, flies were the carriers of devastating pestilence and disease.
Oh, I see.
So you would pray to a god of flies in the hopes that he could control the swarms and, by extension, the plague or the sickness.
Okay, there is a twisted logic to it.
There is. But culturally, this is an act of constructive atheism. Ahaziah is the king of Israel, a nation supposedly bound by a covenant to their god. So by sending an envoy to Ekron, he is publicly declaring that the heavens above Israel are completely empty. He is searching for an oracle, a fortune teller, who will just give him a sterile prediction of the future without demanding any moral accountability.
Man, I think we do this constantly today.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about human nature when we hit a wall, like a terrifying health diagnosis, a massive financial collapse, or some scandal at work.
We panic.
We do. Instead of facing the hard truth or seeking out grounded, challenging counsel that might actually ask us to change our behavior, We look for the Lord of the Flies.
That's a great way to put it.
Like we doom scroll for fringe medical advice at 3 a.m. Or leaders surround themselves with consultants who act as highly paid yes men.
Just offering quick fixes that require zero ethical reflection.
Exactly. We just want someone to tell us it's going to be okay. We don't want to change.
And that desire for an easy answer is precisely what gets intercepted in this story. Ahaziah's messengers never actually make it to Ekron.
Right. They get stopped on the road.
By the prophet Elijah. And Elijah delivers this blistering message. He says, "Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to inquire of Baal-zebub?"
He calls them out immediately.
He does, and then he drops the hammer. "Therefore you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely die."
And the king does not take that well at all.
No, he doesn't.
He sends a military captain with 50 soldiers to basically arrest Elijah.
Yeah.
They find Elijah sitting on top of a hill, and the captain yells, "Man of God, the king says, come down."
This is where the text gets really intense.
Yeah, and here is where I really have to push back on this text, because what happens next is violently uncomfortable. Elijah says, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50.
And it does?
Boom, incinerated. And then the king just sends another 50 men with the exact same result. Fire from heaven.
Or brutal.
100 men are burned alive before a third captain finally approaches on his knees and begs for his life. I have to be honest. How is incinerating 100 soldiers supposed to be an example of moral wisdom for us today?
That is such a fair question.
Like, that sounds like the actions of a tyrant, not a spiritual leader.
That is the exact tension a modern listener should feel, and it's a really vital pushback. To understand this, we have to strip away our modern democratic assumptions.
Okay, so how do they view it?
We have to look at the absolute mechanics of ancient law. Elijah is not operating as a modern pastor or like a life coach.
Right, he's not running a podcast.
Exactly. He is operating as the chief prosecuting attorney in a strict theocracy. Under the Sinai covenant, which was structured exactly like an ancient suzerain vassal treaty god, was the absolute monarch.
And the human king was just a vassal underneath him.
Precisely. So Ahaziah's decision to consult Ekron wasn't just some lapse in personal faith. It was literal high treason against the state.
Okay, so by sending armed troops to arrest the prophet, the king is essentially trying to use brute military force to override the constitution of the nation.
That is exactly what is happening. Ahaziah is saying, "My army is stronger than your divine law."
Wow.
If Elijah had surrendered to those soldiers, the entire foundation of justice in that society would have collapsed under military tyranny.
So the fire was a statement.
The fire wasn't just a petty display of anger. It was a severe historical necessity to prove that political power cannot outmuscle ultimate truth. But, and this is a really crucial distinction our sources make, this is explicitly not a model for modern behavior or leadership.
How so? Because it feels like a dangerous precedent.
It would be. But centuries later, we see a fascinating comparative insight in the historical record of the New Testament. Jesus' own disciples, James and John, faced rejection in a village.
Oh, right.
They actually remembered this exact story from 2 kings, and they asked Jesus, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?"
Just like Elijah did.
Exactly. And Jesus aggressively rebukes them. He tells them they have completely misunderstood the era they are living in.
So the rules changed.
Well, Elijah represents the perfection of strict legal justice in a brutal Iron Age context. He was the terror of the law. But his methods are not the template for modern conflict resolution or grace.
That makes a lot of sense.
We have to separate the ancient historical mechanism of justice from the enduring wisdom of the text.
Okay, let me make sure I have this straight for our listeners. The core wisdom here isn't burn your enemies.
Definitely not.
The wisdom is recognizing that when leadership becomes completely unmoored from reality and ethics, it will eventually try to use brute force to silence the truth.
Yes, exactly.
And truth simply cannot be arrested.
That is the perfect takeaway. And speaking of truth outlasting a corrupt administration, Ahaziah dies in his bed, just as predicted, which brings us to a massive transition.
The passing of the mantle.
Right. Elijah's time on earth is ending, and the leadership has to pass to his protege, Elisha. Elijah is about to be taken away.
And they're walking together, and Elijah keeps testing Elisha, right? He keeps saying, "Stay here, I have to go further."
But Elisha absolutely refuses to leave his side. They cross the Jordan River, which, by the way, is deeply symbolic, echoing Moses and Joshua.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, and just before Elijah departs in the whirlwind, he asks Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you."
And Elisha asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Now, growing up, I always assumed that meant he wanted to be twice as powerful, like he was asking for a superpower upgrade to do double the miracles.
You are definitely not alone in that. That is a very common misreading. But the phrase double portion actually has a highly specific legal meaning in ancient Near Eastern property law.
Oh, really?
Yeah, according to Deuteronomy 21, the double portion was the non-negotiable inheritance right of the firstborn son.
So it's a legal term.
Entirely. When an estate was divided, the firstborn didn't get twice as much money just to go live lavishly on a beach somewhere. He received a double share because he was legally assuming the crushing responsibility of becoming the new patriarch. He had to provide for the widows, manage the debts, and protect the extended family.
Oh, wow. So Elisha isn't asking for more magic tricks at all. He's asking for the heavy burden of leadership.
He is asking to be recognized as the true, legitimate heir to Elijah's prophetic office. And it is an incredibly courageous ask.
Seriously.
He knows that stepping into Elijah's shoes means facing down corrupt kings, enduring poverty, and holding the moral line for an entire nation.
That reframes mentorship completely for me. Think about how we approach succession today, whether that's in a corporation, a family business, or even a community organization.
We usually just want the perks.
Exactly. We often want the title, the corner office, or the prestige of our mentor. But are we actually willing to walk with them to the very end, absorbing the really hard lessons, and then courageously ask for the sheer, grinding weight of responsibility that comes with that office?
That is the real question. And Elisha asked for the weight, and he immediately had to carry it.
He sure did.
But what is so fascinating about the text is how he carries it. After Elijah is gone, you would expect Elisha to march straight to the capital city and start toppling dynasties.
Like a big geopolitical flex.
Right. But instead, his focus radically shifts. He becomes the prophet of the everyday. The lens zooms all the way in from macro geopolitics to the microeconomics of domestic life.
Yes. The story abruptly shifts to a widow. She is the wife of one of the sons of the prophets, which is basically a student in these ancient prophetic academies. And her husband has died, leaving her in just catastrophic debt.
It is a desperate situation.
She comes to Elisha in absolute panic, crying out, "The creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves." We need to pause here because this is another deeply jarring ancient reality. How does a widow's debt equal human trafficking?
It is horrific, but we have to look at the economic mechanisms of the ancient world. They didn't have bankruptcy courts. There was no Chapter 11 restructuring.
No safety net at all.
None. Under ancient Near Eastern law, including the Code of Hammurabi and early Israelite law, if you defaulted on a debt, your physical labor and the labor of your dependents was the collateral.
That is terrifying.
The creditor had the absolute legal right to seize her children as indentured servants to work off the ledger. So this woman isn't just facing eviction, she is facing the total, literal dissolution of her family.
It's the ultimate nightmare for a parent. So she begs Elisha for help. And I just love his response because it's not what you'd expect from a powerful leader.
What does he do?
He doesn't say, "Here's a bag of royal gold from my reserves."
Yeah.
He asks her this diagnostic question. "What do you have in the house?"
Such a powerful question.
Right. And she replies that she has absolutely nothing except 1 small jar of oil.
That diagnostic question is just a brilliant psychological intervention. When we are drowning in crisis, our vision completely narrows. We only see the deficit.
We just see what's missing.
Exactly. We only see the crushing weight of what we owe or what we've lost. By forcing her to identify what she does have, no matter how insignificant it seems, Elisha breaks the paralysis of her despair. He forces her to take an inventory of her existing reality.
He then gives her a truly bizarre set of instructions. He tells her to go out and borrow empty vessels, jars, pots, pans from all her neighbors. Don't just get a few, he says.
Go big.
Yeah, grab everything. Then she is to go inside her house, shut the door behind her and her sons, and start pouring her 1 little jar of oil into the borrowed pots.
Which logically makes no sense.
None. But she does it. She starts pouring, and the oil simply doesn't run out. It completely defies physics. It keeps flowing until every single borrowed vessel in her house is brimming with oil. And the text says, exactly at the moment the last jar is full, the oil stops.
There are several layers of mechanical wisdom here. First, notice that Elisha requires her to engage in community action.
She had to go to her neighbors.
Right. By borrowing jars, she has to swallow her pride and admit to her community that she is preparing for something. Her rescue requires her active participation.
It wasn't passive.
Second, the instruction to shut the door. Why the privacy? Our sources suggest this was a profound act of dignity. Elisha didn't want this to become a public spectacle, like a circus act for the town to gawk at.
Oh, that's beautiful.
The restoration of her family was an intimate, sacred provision.
And then when she runs back to Elisha to tell him what happened, he gives her a strict financial order. He says, go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest.
That sequencing is everything. He doesn't say, go live comfortably and just ignore the creditor.
Which would be tempting.
Of course. But he emphasizes that true integrity requires rendering to all what is rightfully theirs. You cannot build a just life on resources that legally belong to someone else.
Wow.
The miracle wasn't just designed to enrich her. It was designed to restore her social standing, clear her obligations, and free her sons from the machinery of debt slavery.
This theme of everyday, micro-level justice continues immediately into another story that used to really baffle me. It's the story of the floating axe head.
It is a strange one on the surface.
We are reading a text that deals with famines, wars, and royal assassinations. But suddenly, the narrative hits the brakes to tell us about a guy who lost a tool in a river.
It seems incredibly trivial, right? The context is that the prophetic students are building a larger living space near the Jordan River. They are doing manual labor.
Chopping wood.
Yes. One young man is swinging an axe, and the iron head flies off the wooden handle and sinks to the bottom of the murky river. The young man is devastated. He cries out to Elisha, "Alas, my master, it was borrowed."
Which, to a modern reader, feels like a vast overreaction to dropping a tool. Like, just go buy another one at the hardware store.
Right.
But that wasn't the reality for him.
Far from it. We're talking about the Iron Age. Iron smelting was a highly complex, expensive technology, often controlled by neighboring powers like the Philistines.
So it wasn't cheap.
An iron axe head was an enormously expensive piece of capital equipment. For a poor, young theological student, losing a borrowed iron axe head wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was an economic catastrophe.
Just like the widow.
Exactly like the widow. He would now be indebted to his neighbor for a sum he could never possibly repay. His integrity was shattered because he could not return what was entrusted to him.
So Elisha asks where it fell, cuts a stick, tosses it into the water, and the heavy iron axe head defies gravity and floats to the surface. The man grabs it, and his debt is canceled.
It's amazing.
The mechanism here isn't just about a magic trick with metallurgy, it's about what the universe cares about. The text is aggressively making the point that the God who determines the fate of empires also intimately cares about the quiet, suffocating anxiety of a student who can't pay back a borrowed tool.
It elevates basic, everyday honesty to a matter of divine importance.
It poses such a sharp question for our listener right now. We often look for wisdom in grand, sweeping life changes. But how do you treat the things you borrow from others?
That's a great audit to do.
Whether it's a physical object or someone's time or an opportunity, the text argues that your integrity in those micro-interactions is just as vital as how you handle a macro crisis.
Exactly. But what happens when we move from the marginalized poor back to the absolute height of power? Because the text doesn't let us stay comfortable in the village.
Right, it whips us right back to the top.
It rips us back into the geopolitical sphere with a story that perfectly bridges the micro and the macro.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Naaman paradox.
Naaman is one of the most compelling psychological studies in all of ancient literature. The text introduces him with a resume that any modern leader would kill for.
He's top tier.
He is the commander of the army of the king of Syria. He is a great man, highly favored, a mighty man of valor who has delivered massive military victories for his nation.
He has everything.
But there is a devastating comma in his biography.
Yeah.
He is a mighty man of valor, but he's a leper.
Underneath the medals, the wealth, and the terrifying armor, he is literally rotting. He has a skin disease that, in the ancient world, meant extreme physical suffering and eventual social isolation.
He's a dead man walking.
He is the ultimate insider, but his body is turning him into an outcast. And the solution to this insurmountable problem comes from the most unlikely place imaginable.
This is where the power dynamics are brilliantly inverted. Naaman's wife has a servant, a young, unnamed Israelite girl who was taken captive by Naaman's own raiding parties.
Think about her status.
She is the lowest person on the socioeconomic ladder, a female, foreign, child slave. Yet, she possesses the one piece of intelligence the commander's war room doesn't have.
She has the answer.
She tells her mistress, if only my master were with the prophet who was in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy.
I really want to pause on the sheer stubbornness of human pride here. How often does a breakthrough insight like a piece of data that could save a company, a relationship, or a life sit with the entry-level employee?
Or the marginalized voice.
Or the person we've just totally dismissed as unimportant. But the ego of the executive suite prevents them from ever listening.
To Naaman's credit, his desperation actually overrides his pride. He listens to the captive girl, he gets letters of introduction from his king, and he heads to Israel.
But he doesn't go as a humble patient.
Definitely not.
He goes as a conqueror. He packs a staggering fortune. Our sources estimate he brought talents of silver and pieces of gold that would be worth millions of dollars today, along with 10 changes of luxury clothing.
He wants to buy his cure.
He arrives with his horses, his chariots, and a massive military entourage, and he parks this intimidating display of wealth and power right at the front door of Elisha's humble mud brick house.
He is waiting for the VIP treatment. He wants the red carpet rolled out. But Elisha's response is brutally anticlimactic.
It really is.
Elisha doesn't even open the door. He doesn't come out to greet the great general. He just sends a messenger out with a sticky note prescription. Go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored.
And Naaman absolutely loses his mind.
He flies into a rage.
Let's analyze why he is so angry, because it reveals the sunk cost fallacy of the human ego. Naaman explicitly states his expectations. He says, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper.
He wanted a show.
He wanted a theatrical, highly produced miracle that matched his perceived status. Furthermore, he is deeply insulted by the mechanism of the cure.
The river itself.
Yes. The Jordan River was notoriously muddy and unimpressive. Naaman says, Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? He feels the solution is completely beneath his dignity.
This is such a profound mirror for us. Think about the psychological resistance we have to simple solutions.
We hate simple solutions.
We do. If you go to a doctor feeling terrible and they tell you you need to sleep 8 hours, drink a liter of water, and walk for 30 minutes a day, you feel cheated.
Right, you think, I'm a complex, high-performing executive. I need a $5,000 biohacking protocol and imported supplements.
Exactly. We reject the foundational, simple daily disciplines because they don't stroke our ego. We want a cure that costs us money, not humility.
And it takes the intervention of Naaman's servants, once again, voices from lower down the hierarchy, to break through his pride.
They really risk a lot talking to him like that.
They do, but they approach him carefully and use flawless logic. They say, My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, wash and be clean?
They point out that if Elisha had demanded a grueling, heroic quest, Naaman would have done it instantly to prove his worth.
So why is he refusing the easy path?
It breaks him. He swallows his massive pride, climbs down from his chariot, walks into the muddy Jordan, and dips himself 7 times.
Why?
And the text says his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. He is entirely healed.
It's a beautiful moment.
He is so overwhelmed that he rushes back to Elisha's house, stands before him, and tries to force this massive fortune on him as payment.
And Elisha refuses to take a single coin. He says, As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none.
He just leaves millions on the table.
Because this wasn't just Elisha being polite, it was a vital theological mechanism. Naaman needed to understand that the grace of truth cannot be purchased, traded, or leveraged by human wealth.
Healing is a free gift.
By refusing the money, Elisha maintains the absolute integrity and independence of his prophetic office. He owes Syria nothing.
But the story doesn't end with this beautiful picture of integrity, does it? Because Elisha has an intern.
Gehazi.
Yes, his servant, Gehazi, has been watching this entire exchange. And Gehazi is doing the math. He is watching millions of dollars just walk away down the dirt road.
The text lets us hear Gehazi's internal monologue, and it's chilling. He says, My master has spared this Naaman the Syrian in not accepting what he brought. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him.
Gehazi represents the dark mechanics of greed taking root in proximity to power. He sprints after Naaman's chariot.
And when Naaman sees him running, he actually steps down to meet him.
Out of respect.
Right. And Gehazi fabricates a highly specific, very believable lie. He says, My master sent me. Two young men of the prophetic schools just arrived from the hill country, and Elisha changed his mind. Could you please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing?
It's the perfect grift. It sounds exactly like a charitable donation.
Yeah.
Naaman, out of his immense gratitude, actually forces 2 talents of silver on Gehazi, even having his own servants carry the heavy bags back for him.
Gehazi takes the bags, hides them in his house, and then nonchalantly goes back to stand before Elisha, pretending he was just sweeping the floor or whatever.
But Elisha's vision isn't limited to the physical room. He asks Gehazi, "Where have you been?" Gehazi lies again. "Your servant went nowhere."
Then Elisha delivers a devastating indictment. He says, "Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments?"
And then the hammer falls.
Elisha declares that the leprosy of Naaman will now cling to Gehazi and his descendants forever. Gehazi walks out of the room, leprous as snow.
Okay, I have to stop here because this is where a lot of readers just throw their hands up.
It's a tough scene.
Earlier, before Naaman left, he made a really strange request to Elisha. Naaman said, "When I go back to Syria, my job requires me to escort my king into the temple of the false god Rimmon. And when the king bows down, I have to physically bow down with him to support his arm. Will your God pardon me for this?"
And Elisha surprisingly says, "Go in peace." He gives him a pass.
So let me get this straight. The foreign general gets permission to bow in a pagan temple to keep his political job. But the prophet's own servant gets a permanent flesh-eating disease for skimming some silver. How is that a consistent application of justice?
It's a brilliant juxtaposition, and it reveals a deeply nuanced mechanism of grace versus accountability. Look at their starting points. Naaman is a brand new convert stepping back into a complex, hostile geopolitical reality. He is asking for grace regarding a physical, political necessity, while his heart is fully committed to truth.
So Elisha gives him space to navigate that messy reality. Go in peace.
Exactly. Gehazi, on the other hand, is the ultimate insider. He has seen the miracles. He knows the core operating system of the prophetic office.
He should know better.
His sin wasn't just stealing money. He fundamentally perverted the witness of Elisha to the outside world. He made it look like the prophet could be bought after all.
Oh, that makes sense.
Gehazi weaponized his insider access for hidden, hypocritical greed. The text is arguing that the heaviest accountability falls on those closest to the truth who use it for self-enrichment.
That is a staggering warning for anyone in leadership. The closer you are to the center of authority, the more destructive your hidden compromises become.
Absolutely.
But there's a chilling reality we have to face here. Individual moments of grace, like Naaman's healing, don't automatically stop the machinery of systemic violence. Because right after this incredible interaction with the Syrian commander, the Syrian army is back at the border trying to slaughter the Israelites.
Which brings us into the mechanics of warfare and what you could call the physics of despair.
Yes, the narrative scale violently expands again. The king of Syria is furious because his military intelligence is failing. Every time he sets up a secret ambush for the king of Israel, Elisha prophetically warns the Israelite king, and the army avoids the trap.
The Syrian king is convinced there is a mole in his war room.
But his officers tell him, no, it's not a spy. It's Elisha the prophet. He knows the words you speak in your own bedroom.
So the Syrian king decides to eliminate the intelligence asset. He discovers Elisha is staying in a small city called Dothan. Under the cover of night, the king sends a massive strike force, horses, chariots, a great army, to completely encircle the city.
I try to put myself in the shoes of Elisha's new servant here. He wakes up early the next morning, probably to get water, walks outside the city gates, and stops dead in his tracks.
He's completely surrounded.
The horizon is blocked by thousands of heavily armed Syrian soldiers, chariots glinting in the morning sun, cutting off every single escape route. He runs back to Elisha in absolute chest-crushing panic. "Alas, my master, what shall we do?"
The physical reality is overwhelming. The math says they are dead.
But Elisha's reaction completely defies the physical circumstances. He is perfectly calm. He says to the servant, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them."
And then Elisha doesn't pray for the army to be destroyed. He prays a prayer of perception.
Which is so interesting.
He says, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." Suddenly, the servant's vision shifts. He looks past the Syrian troops and he sees that the entire mountain behind them is full of horses and chariots of fire surrounding Elisha.
I love this because it maps so perfectly onto the psychology of modern anxiety. When we are in a crisis, a looming deadline, a cultural hostility, a massive relational breakdown, all we can see is the Syrian army.
That's all that's in front of us.
We just see the threatening data points surrounding us. Our physical senses tell us we are totally isolated and doomed. Wisdom in this context is recognizing our own blindness to the unseen support structures.
Precisely. It's the historical resilience of those who survived before us. It's the deep community we haven't tapped into. It's the unseen providence of reality.
When you are trapped in the physics of despair, the only way out is a sudden, radical shift in perception.
And Elisha doesn't just sit on the mountain enjoying the view either. The Syrian army starts marching down toward him to capture him, and Elisha prays for them to be struck with blindness.
Now, our sources clarify this wasn't necessarily a total physical loss of sight, right?
Correct. It was more like a state of deep cognitive confusion or illusion. It's a psychological blinding. They are completely disoriented.
So what does Elisha do?
He walks right up to the commanders of the strike force and says, "This is not the way and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek."
It's an audacious move. He personally leads the entire confused, hostile army miles away, straight through the gates of Samaria, directly into the heavily fortified capital of their enemy, Israel.
Talk about walking into the lion's den.
When the king of Israel sees an entire enemy battalion hand-delivered into his capital, his eyes light up. He asks Elisha, "My father, shall I strike them down? Shall I strike them down?"
He is practically salivating at the chance to massacre them and end the war.
But Elisha issues a shocking command. He says, "No. Would you strike down those whom you have taken captive? Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink and go to their master."
What a paradigm shift.
The king obeys. He throws a massive feast for his enemies and then opens the gates and lets them walk home. And the text notes that the Syrians stopped raiding Israel. Elisha broke the cycle of retaliatory violence with an overwhelming, asymmetrical display of generosity.
It is a stunning triumph of grace. However, human memory is tragically short. The text indicates that some time passes, perhaps years, and the lessons of that feast are forgotten by a new Syrian administration.
Which is really sad.
Because the very next story plunges us into one of the most harrowing, stomach-turning realities of ancient geopolitics. Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, gathers his entire army and lays a brutal, sustained siege against Samaria.
We need to explain how a siege actually worked, because it wasn't just a battle. It was weaponized starvation.
Exactly.
The enemy army encircles the walls, cuts off all supply chains, poisons the wells outside, and just sits there for months waiting for the people inside to slowly starve to death.
The economics of the siege are catastrophic. The text gives us the hyperinflation data. A donkey's head, an animal considered ceremonially unclean and usually never eaten, is selling for 80 shekels of silver.
That is an insane amount of money for garbage.
And a half pint of dove's dung is selling for 5 shekels.
Wait, dove's dung? Like literal bird droppings?
There's debate among scholars whether dove's dung was a literal desperate food source or just a slang term for a really cheap, inedible seed pod. Either way, it highlights absolute economic collapse.
But the text doesn't spare us the deepest horror here. The king of Israel is walking the perimeter on the city wall, and a woman screams out to him for help. He assumes she wants food, but her complaint is actually legal dispute over cannibalism.
It is so dark.
She tells the king that she and another woman made a pact to boil and eat their own children. They ate her son yesterday, but today the other woman hid her son and refused to share. It is so gruesome I almost want to skip it. Why does the author include such a sickening detail?
It is a severe obstacle for the reader, but it is deeply intentional. Centuries earlier, in the book of Deuteronomy, there was a specific, terrifying covenant curse outlined.
Oh, this was predicted?
Yes. The text warned that if the nation completely abandoned justice and truth, they would eventually be besieged by their enemies, and the psychological degradation would be so profound that parents would consume their own children.
That's proof of the collapse.
The author of 2 Kings is documenting that the absolute bottom of human depravity has been reached. This is what happens when a society is completely driven to the brink by its own systemic failures and destructive conflicts. The physical starvation has produced total moral collapse.
The king of Israel tears his clothes in grief, exposing that he's wearing sackcloth underneath. But his grief doesn't lead to introspection, does it? It leads to blame.
He looks for a scapegoat.
He decides that this is all Elisha's fault, and he swears an oath to cut off Elisha's head that very day. He marches to Elisha's house with his executioner. And as he stands there, the king voices the ultimate cry of cynicism. "This evil is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?"
He has completely given up.
And right at the apex of that suffocating despair, Elisha delivers an impossible economic forecast.
He says, "Hear the word of the Lord. Tomorrow about this time, a seah of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria."
He is predicting that within 24 hours, the hyperinflation will vanish, the famine will break, and the economy will return to baseline normal.
Now, standing right next to the king is a royal officer, a lord on whose arm the king leaned. This man is the physical embodiment of entrenched cynicism.
He is a total pessimist.
He listens to Elisha's prophecy and sneers. He says, "If the Lord himself should make windows in heaven, could this thing be?" He literally cannot fathom a reality outside of the starvation he currently sees.
His imagination has been starved right alongside his body.
Elisha looks at the cynical Lord and issues a dark counter-prophecy. "You shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat of it."
Which brings us to the most unlikely heroes in the entire book. While the king and his royal court are despairing inside the palace, we zoom outside the city gates. There are 4 men sitting there who have leprosy.
The ultimate outcasts.
They aren't allowed inside the city to eat the donkey heads, and they are terrified of the Syrian army outside. They are trapped in the ultimate no man's land. But these marginalized men employ a brutal, pragmatic logic that the king lacks.
It's the clarity of having absolutely nothing left to lose. They look at each other and say, "Why are we sitting here until we die? If we go into the city, the famine is there and we die. If we sit here, we die. So let's defect.
It makes total sense.
Let's walk into the Syrian camp. If they spare our lives, we live. If they kill us, we just die a few days early."
So as the sun goes down, these 4 starving outcasts limp toward the massive Syrian military encampment. They expect to be shot with arrows or taken as slaves. They reach the edge of the camp, peel back a tent flap, and it's empty.
Completely deserted.
They go to the next tent. Empty. Horses are tied up. Campfires are still burning. Rations are laid out. But there is not a single human being in the camp.
We have to explain the mechanics of this flight. The text tells us that the Lord caused the Syrian army to hear an auditory illusion, the deafening roar of chariots, horses, and a massive approaching army.
In the dark. That must have been terrifying.
In the geopolitics of the time, kings often hired mercenary armies. The Syrians panicked, assuming the king of Israel had somehow managed to hire the Hittites from the north and the Egyptians from the south.
They thought they were surrounded.
Believing they were about to be flanked and massacred in the dark, they fled on foot. They didn't even take time to untie their horses. They just ran for the Jordan River, abandoning their entire logistical supply chain.
The 4 lepers hit the absolute jackpot. They stumble into a tent, gorge themselves on food and wine, grab handfuls of silver and gold, go hide it in the desert, and then come back to loot a second tent.
They are hoarding the unexpected feast.
But then, an incredible psychological and moral shift happens. They stop. They look at the piles of food, and they look back toward the walls of Samaria, where people are literally boiling their children. They say to one another, "We're not doing right. This day is a day of good news. If we are silent and wait until the morning light, punishment will overtake us."
Their conscience violently activates. They realize that hoarding life-saving resources while their community is starving just hundreds of yards away is a profound failure of their shared humanity.
Their survival instinct transforms into a moral obligation.
So they run back to the city walls in the middle of the night and shout up to the gatekeepers, "The Syrian camp is empty."
At first, the king's paranoia kicks in. He thinks it's a tactical trap, that the Syrians are hiding in the fields, waiting for the Israelites to come out so they can slaughter them.
But his advisors convince him to send out 5 of their last surviving horses to scout.
The scouts track the Syrians all the way to the Jordan River, finding the road littered with clothes and weapons the soldiers threw away in their panic. It's true. The siege is over.
The gates of Samaria are thrown open, and the starving, desperate population surges out like a tidal wave to plunder the Syrian camp. The influx of grain and supplies is so massive that the market stabilizes instantly.
Supply and demand at work.
The price of flour and barley drops to exactly the shekel price Elisha had prophesied 24 hours earlier.
But what about the cynical Lord?
Yeah.
The guy who said even God couldn't fix the economy.
The king had appointed that exact Lord to manage the crowd control at the city gate. When the starving population stampeded out to get the food, they simply ran him over.
Whoa.
The text says the people trampled him in the gate and he died. Just as Elisha predicted, He saw the absolute abundance with his own eyes, but his cynicism became his literal grave. He did not get to taste it.
It is such a stark contrast.
Yeah.
The royal lord had all the access, all the education, and all the status, but his refusal to believe that a better reality was possible crushed him.
Meanwhile, the outcast lepers, who had nothing, were willing to take a risk.
They stepped into the unknown, and most importantly, they chose to share their discovery. Their actions saved an entire city, but not everyone chooses to share. And this brings us to the final, darkest thematic turn in our deep dive today.
We are moving from those who share life to those who aggressively hoard power.
Yes, we must examine the ultimate decay of leadership when ambition is left completely unchecked. We're shifting our focus back up north to Damascus, the capital of Syria.
Elisha travels to Damascus. Ben-Hadad, the Syrian king who had besieged Samaria, is now deathly ill. He hears that the legendary Israelite prophet is in town, so he sends his top military general, a man named Hazael, to intercept Elisha and ask if he will recover from his sickness.
And Hazael doesn't just show up to ask a question. He brings a caravan, 40 camels loaded with the finest luxury goods of Damascus. It's an intimidating, overwhelming display of wealth and soft power.
He stands before Elisha and respectfully says, "Your son Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, has sent me to you, saying, 'Shall I recover from this sickness?'"
Elisha's response is a terrifying paradox. He tells Hazael, "Go, say to him, you shall certainly recover, but the Lord has shown me that he shall certainly die."
That makes no sense on the surface. The disease won't kill him, but he's going to die anyway.
Exactly, it's a riddle of assassination. But what happens next in the text is one of the most psychologically tense moments in all of ancient literature.
Elisha stops talking. He just locks eyes with Hazael. He stares at the general, unblinking, for so long that Hazael becomes deeply uncomfortable and actually blushes.
The silence stretches on until Elisha suddenly breaks down and begins to weep. Hazael is thoroughly freaked out at this point. He asks, "Why does my Lord weep?"
And Elisha explains the vision he is seeing. He is weeping because he sees the apocalyptic violence that Hazael is going to unleash on the people of Israel.
He prophesies that Hazael will set their fortresses on fire, kill their young men, dash their infants to pieces, and rip open pregnant women.
He is describing the absolute, most barbaric atrocities of ancient warfare. And pay close attention to Hazael's reaction here. It is the purest expression of human self-deception.
Hazael is offended. He says, "What is your servant, who is but a dog, that he should do this great thing?"
Hazael cannot imagine himself as a monster. He views himself as a loyal, disciplined soldier. He genuinely does not believe he possesses the capacity for that level of sadistic evil.
We all do this. We all think we are the steadfast heroes of our own stories. We think, I would never embezzle that money, or I would never betray my family. But we underestimate what happens when the guardrails are removed.
Elisha doesn't argue with him. He simply states the mechanism that will unlock the monster. He says, "The Lord has shown me that you are to be king over Syria."
Elisha is identifying the corrupting nature of absolute power.
Hazael might not be a monster while he is a servant, but the moment he realizes the throne is within his grasp, his entire moral architecture collapses.
Proximity to power without accountability instantly unleashes the darkness he didn't know he had. And the speed of the corruption is breathtaking. It happens the very next day.
Hazael goes back to King Ben-Hadad. The king eagerly asks, "What did Elisha say?" Hazael delivers only the first half of the prophecy. "He told me that you would certainly recover." He lulls the king into a false sense of security.
Then the text details the assassination. Hazael takes a thick cloth, dips it in water, and spreads it over the king's face.
Let's look at the mechanics of that murder. Why a wet cloth?
I was wondering that too.
In the ancient world, political assassinations were tricky. If you stab the king or poison him and he convulses, the royal guard will execute you for treason.
You leave evidence.
But by using a heavy, water-soaked blanket over the face of an already desperately ill man, Hazael suffocates him without leaving a single bruise or mark of a struggle.
It looks exactly like he just succumbed to his respiratory illness in his sleep.
It is calculated, cold-blooded, and completely untraceable. Hazael murders his king and immediately seizes the throne.
He went from saying, "I am just a dog, I could never do such evil," to suffocating his boss in 24 hours. That is the terrifying velocity of unchecked ambition.
But this rot at the top isn't just isolated to Syria. The author shifts our view south to the kingdom of Judah to show us that this corruption is highly contagious.
Yes, the narrative moves to King Jehoram of Judah. Now, To understand the tragedy here, you have to know that his father, Jehoshaphat, was considered one of the most righteous reforming kings in Judah's history.
But Jehoshaphat made one catastrophic geopolitical miscalculation. To secure peace and economic prosperity, he married his son Jehoram to Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, the profoundly corrupt rulers of the northern kingdom.
This is what ancient texts often refer to as unequal yoking. And we need to explain what that actually means, because it's not just a religious phrase about who you hang out with.
No, the yoke was the heavy wooden harness connecting two oxen to pull a plow. If you yoke a massive ox with a small donkey, they will walk in circles and tear each other apart.
That makes perfect sense.
In leadership theory, unequal yoking refers to the destructive merging of two fundamentally incompatible core operating systems. Jehoshaphat tried to merge the theocratic, justice-oriented system of Judah with the tyrannical, power-hungry system of Ahab's family.
He thought he was making a savvy political alliance.
But you cannot ally with corruption without importing it.
And Jehoram imports it wholesale. Once he takes the throne, influenced by his wife Athaliah, he doesn't just introduce idol worship. The text tells us elsewhere that to secure his grip on power, Jehoram systematically murders all 6 of his own brothers.
Think about the political calculation behind that fratricide. His brothers were raised by the same righteous father. They represented alternative, likely more moral centers of power.
So they had to go.
To Jehoram, operating under the ruthless new software he installed from Ahab's dynasty, his brothers weren't family, they were political threats. He compromised his core values to maintain his grip on the throne, and it resulted in the literal slaughter of his own bloodline.
The ambition went completely unchecked by any community or integrity. It is a tragic, sobering warning. You compromise your values just a little bit to secure a professional alliance or a social advantage, and before you know it, the logic of that compromise demands more and more of you.
You wake up suffocating your principles with a wet cloth.
Or destroying the people closest to you to protect your position. So, here is the urgent reflection for you, the listener, as we wrap up this massive exploration. Where in your life are you compromising your core values for the sake of an alliance? And are you brave enough to cultivate the self-awareness to realize what you might be capable of if your ambition is left unchecked?
That self-awareness is the ultimate dividing line between wisdom and destruction in these texts. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We have traversed incredible extremes today.
We really have.
We've seen kings fall through lattices and servants succumb to greed. But hold in your mind the stark contrast between the royal, cynical lord in the besieged city of Samaria and the outcast lepers sitting in the dirt outside the gate.
That image stays with you.
The Lord had everything: power, access, education, and status. But his cynicism, his absolute refusal to believe that a better reality was even possible, literally crushed him to death. He could not survive his own lack of imagination.
And the lepers?
The lepers, on the other hand, had absolutely nothing. They were starving, diseased, and rejected by society. But their willingness to take a risk, to step out into the terrifying unknown of the Syrian camp, and most importantly, their profound moral choice to share the feast rather than hoard it, ended up saving an entire civilization.
Which lens are you looking through today? Are you viewing your challenges through the lens of cynical preservation that isolates you and eventually crushes you? Or are you looking through the lens of shared discovery, starting with your meager jar of oil and stepping out in a way that empowers everyone around you? That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.